How's it guys, this is Dayvy, FPL, and welcome back to the Fantasy Premier League video here on my channel. Now in this video, I'll be taking you guys through the ultimate guide to the upcoming Game Week 4. So an absolute banger is on the cards here. The talking point lineup is absolutely outstanding. So much to talk about. Let's go over what we're going to do. Now in this ultimate guide, I'll be covering kind of a big debate about the midfielders. I'm going to start off the debate with Arsenal versus United. Should you guys sell Bruno, Rashford, Martinelli or Saka? Following on from that is going to be, if you want to take one of these options out, who to replace them with. It's MADDISON, FODEN or Raheem Sterling. So I'll be trying to compare and give you guys the best option out of those three players, and let's see what the stats say. Then I'll be taking a little bit of a deeper dive into the defender options. For you Gabriel owners as well as myself, I'm looking to replace one of my defenders, so I'll be going over who I currently have my eyes on. Then all the usual talking points covered in these ultimate guides will be taking place, the stats review, the best fixtures, the captaincy, so this is going to be an absolute jam-packed one. So if that's something that you guys are interested in, sit back, relax, and let's get straight into it. So to start off the ultimate guide, as we always do, let's go over the team stats. I'll be going over the attacking and the defensive stats, going over the top 6 and bottom 6 teams. So on the left hand side, let's bring up the top 6 sides from an attacking point of view. Now just remember, I do use XG non-penalty for my attacking stats, but if you guys want the penalty variant, you can always go over to Fix and go over to the Optastat sandbox. Now please just remember that this is also per 90 minutes, so for example Brighton have been expected to score 2.5 goals over the opening 3 games, which is simply outstanding. So those Brighton assets, if you guys do want to go for them, just remember they have had a little bit of an easier run and the fixtures get a lot tougher from Game Week 4 onwards. Aston Villa are closely next. I consider myself to be lucky as an Ollie Watkins seller, as they're still putting up some ridiculous numbers. Now obviously Ollie Watkins hasn't been kind of the best option, has ticked along nicely though over the opening 3 games, but someone cheaper like a Dayvy has been absolute gold. The next team though is one that we heavily focused on last week. It was Manchester United, 2.16 XG per game. We spoke about how the stats were looking pretty strong for them. Even individually, Bruno and Rashford, they had XG and XA numbers that were pretty decent, and luckily the patience paid off with a 7 and a 12 pointer. Now just keep this in mind when you do go over the Bruno and Rashford versus kind of Saka Martinelli debate, as Arsenal on in the top 6. The next teams are Chelsea, Man City and Spurs. A little bit kind of strange there, the fact that we're comparing Sterling, Foden and MADDISON all together, and between the teams of those players, it's super close. So all you guys have to know is that Chelsea, Man City and Spurs are pretty attacking this season like they have been in previous ones. Now as mentioned, please just take note of Arsenal not being in the top 6, they're actually around the mid-table. But I guess all these teams you kind of expect to do pretty well, but nice to see, as I said, United performing decently, but their players are just underperforming their stats. Now going on to the right hand side, or the bottom 6 teams, the worst attack in the Prem at the moment is Sheffield United with 0.63 XG per game. Now that was actually enough to score against Man City, the best defense in the Prem at the moment, so it just shows you the stats don't always tell the truth. Then the next 2 teams, Luton and Burnley, please just remember they've only actually played 2 games this Premier League season, but as expected their attacks are pretty bad. Fulham, Nottingham Forest and Bournemouth kind of lead out the sides, and if I had to give my prediction of who would be kind of the 6 worst teams in the Prem before the season started, it probably would have been these 6 teams. So quite a predictable start, but I think most of these sides have had some tougher fixtures, so just keep that in mind. So just make a mental note of the attacking stats. I'm going to go over to the defensive numbers and show you guys which defenders or teams to target. So on the left hand side, the top 6 sides, no questions there. Man City, the best defense in the Prem at the moment, and I'm actually going for the expected clean sheet metric for these stats. So what this is telling you is the kind of probability per 90 minutes of a side keeping a clean sheet. So for example, Man City have a 61% chance. Now don't worry, that's not kind of a probability or kind of a guesstimation, it's based on XG conceded, but I prefer the X clean sheet metric over the XG conceded one. Just kind of averages out the clean sheets relatively nicely, gives us a nice indication. Obviously with defenders, we get FPL points for clean sheets, and they might have had a bad game where they conceded a lot of XG. So Man City number 1, but the second team I've got my eye on, it's Brentford at 0.44. So the second best defense over the opening couple games. Now their fixtures have been quite easy, just keep that in mind. But if you're looking to get a goalkeeper, Flecken looks like the best option. So that's super annoying because I had Flecken in kind of every one of my drafts except for the final week, so I am kind of regretting my decision. But if you guys do want to go for Rico Henry at his kind of price point, super reliable, and he also has some attacking threat as a fullback. Then Arsenal up next, but that wasn't enough to kind of keep a clean sheet against Fulham on the weekend, and I've actually gone a little bit off their defense to be honest. But if you are kind of a very stats-based manager, you'll probably keep a Saliba because the clean sheet chance has been there. Then we have Nottingham Forest, a surprise entry here. Us Turner owners are being quite lucky with these stats, so let's hope the clean sheets do flow through. Then finally Chelsea and Crystal Palace, I own both these kind of defenses, own Ben Chilwell, also own Johnston, so nice to see that the numbers are still pretty decent. Then in terms of the worst 6 defenses, now these are teams to target from an attacking point of view. If your striker's facing them like Erling Haaland is against Fulham, they're almost guaranteed to score. So the worst defense at the moment is going to be Luton, but please remember, them and Burnley, the first and third worst defenses, have only played 2 games, but that could actually be a good or a bad thing. But I still consider that Fulham defense to be the worst in the Prem at the moment, with 0.05 expected clean sheets per game. So at least they aren't facing one of the best strikers the Prem has ever seen this weekend. All I can say is that if you aren't on Erling Haaland for the captain, you might want to think otherwise. Now the one team I want to focus on here is going to be Brighton. Yes, they've actually had some tougher games here and there, but I do think that 0.12 expected clean sheets per game is pretty low, even from their standards. So what this is telling us is that if you guys do have players facing Brighton, they could actually get a large amount of chances. So just keep that in mind, as they are rated as a great fixture over on FPL. Then we have Bournemouth and Wolves, kind of an expectation. They're not great defenses at the moment. And Liverpool also won 0.15. So definitely kind of target these teams if you want some attacking threat. And just remember about Brighton. So that's going to wrap up our kind of stats review of the opening game weeks. As always, I say we only have kind of 3 or 2 weeks of data at the moment. Very kind of small sample size. So just take that with a pinch of salt. Now, if you guys do want to go over any of the stats, go over to Fix's website. They have an Opta stat sandbox, every stat that your heart could desire. And you can even make some new ones if you want to. Now, the next talking point is more of a reminder here. Please remember that we do have some League Cup games happening tonight. I'm recording this on Tuesday evening as well as Wednesday evening, but not all the Premier League teams are actually playing. So for example, Liverpool aren't playing, but Spurs are. They're playing against Fulham on Tuesday night. But I generally think most of these sides should be second string. So maybe on Thursday or on Wednesday after the games have concluded, just go and check that your players aren't injured at the current moment, because there are quite a few Prem teams actually featuring. But as I said, not a talking point, just a reminder here. So just consider the League Cup games happening midweek. Now the first big talking point of the video is going to be a little bit of a sad one. It's going to be Gabriel out. The reason it's kind of sad is that last week I sat here and I told you guys to probably keep him because I thought he was going to play. And what ended up happening, he was benched yet again. Now you guys might be thanking me if you did own an Udogie or owned a Gusto from Chelsea, because you would have had those points off the bench, as Gabriel didn't even feature in that game. But I do think the time has come, but it might actually be a little bit of a weird timing, because a lot of people are saying the reason Gabriel has been out of the squad is because Zinchenko hasn't been featuring, as Zinchenko compliments Gabriel quite a bit. So yes, he might actually get his start now that Zinchenko is back in training, going to be back in the starting 11 fairly shortly. With the fixtures turning a little bit tougher, I would definitely transfer him out. So which options should you guys be looking at? Well, the first team I've actually excluded from my team because I spoke about them last week. It's going to be those Man City defenders. The reason I did that is I don't want to talk about the same teams and the same players every single ultimate guide. The talking points are the same from last week to this week, so your Man City options are always going to be decent. Now my favorite option, as mentioned in last week's ultimate guide, is Ruben Diaz. Yes, he is more expensive than a Guardiola, that sort of thing, but I do think he's the most nailed to go for. So if you guys do want to go for him as a replacement, that's where I would look for Man City, but the Man City defenders don't offer that much attacking threat. So let's go over some players and some teams that do offer that attacking threat. The first one's going to be Newcastle. Now my favorite option from Newcastle is going to be an obvious one. It's Kieran Trippier. Now yes, he is more expensive than Gabriel, kind of 1.5 more expensive. But I just want to plant the seed here because you might want him in a few game weeks time. Now Botman has just got injured at the current moment, but he should be back in a few weeks time, so he might be a cheap alternative. Now Fabian Schär is also quite attacking, so if you want to go for a cheaper Trippier, he might be the selection, but I think Trippier is the main man to go for. Now would I go for him kind of for game week 4, game week 5? Maybe not. Brighton and Brentford, they're pretty good attacks at the moment. But the Sheffield United fixture and onwards is absolutely outstanding. Now this is kind of natural. The reason we didn't go for Newcastle options is because they had a very tough run to start the season. So naturally, once those fixtures are done, they're going to have, as I say, a lovely sea of green. Now there's a little bit of concern though about Newcastle and Kieran Trippier as a whole. Livramento was signed in the transfer window as kind of a regen of himself. And with the Champions League starting fairly shortly, Kieran Trippier might be rotated. So just keep that in mind when you guys are considering him, but I just want to plant the seed of a Newcastle defender, as you might want one from game week 6 onwards. Now more realistic replacement at the current moment is going to be Udogie from Spurs. You guys would have seen him on the weekend, might have picked up a knock actually, but he seems to be fine. But just watch out for the press conference coming up on Thursday or Friday. Now lovely fixtures for Spurs coming up. Yes, Arsenal in kind of game week 6, but after that the fixtures still improve. And I honestly think in the next 2 game weeks, that's 2 clean sheets for Spurs. Not only the clean sheet threat, but the attacking threat is definitely going to be there. Kind of similar situation with a lot of the left backs in the Prem at the moment, almost playing like an attacker. So at the current moment, he's my favorite selection as a replacement for Gabriel. You guys can play him every so often. He rotates pretty well with our current defenders, and he is cheaper than Gabriel. Now another option that you guys can also look at is Gusto from Chelsea. I just prefer Doggy at the current moment, but Gusto is a perfectly fine selection. Otherwise, the usual options, Rico Henry, great asset, Brentford's fixtures still look pretty decent, and you guys just saw that they're the second best defense in the Prem. But as I said, Gabriel might actually start featuring in games, but I do think the time has come for you to take him out, as he's just dropping in price every single game week. But in the comments down below, if you guys do still own Gabriel, who's your replacement at the moment, I'm fairly sure that I've probably named your current replacement, but if I haven't, you guys can always educate us. Now the next talking point is going to be the biggest of this ultimate guide. It's going to be the midfielder debate. We're going to start off with the debate of who to sell between the Arsenal and the United assets. So in my personal team, I own all 4 of these assets. If you guys do own an Odegaard instead of a Saka, that sort of thing, that's 100% fine. But I think the 4 most popular options are Martinelli, Rashford, Saka, and Bruno. Now, there's been kind of a big debate about who to take out. Obviously, Maddison, Sterling, Foden, all these options are performing pretty well, and we haven't seen the most returns from these 4 assets. So what I decided to do is I'm going to go over a stats comparison, a fixture comparison, to give you guys who I would suggest selling. So let's go over the left hand side first. Let's go over the stats. These are going to be kind of stats ranging from minutes, XG, XA, actual points versus expected points. All of these stats are from Fix. Now these stats are also per 90 minutes, except for obviously the minutes, but you guys can incorporate that when you look at the rest of the stats. So according to minutes, Bruno is definitely the most nailed option. It's played basically every single minute. 270, that's 3 times 90 minutes, and that's an expectation because he is pretty nailed. Now what I will add is that most of these options are quite nailed themselves. You can see that Martelli has the lowest amount of minutes, but still a pretty decent amount. Now I guess the only thing that you can raise from this is that Martelli is the most kind of subbed out of them, and definitely kind of a factor that we have to consider if we're looking at these 4. Now let's move over to XG. Now just please remember, this is actually XG non-penalty. This would actually mean that Saka and Bruno have a higher XG if you do include the penalties, as both of them have scored 1 this season. So just consider that these 2 players are penalty takers, but without that, Rashford has the highest XG. Bruno's XG without the penalty is also pretty high, to be honest. 0.42 for an assist, inverted commas, is really decent and even beats Saka at the moment. The lowest XG is actually going to come from Martelli, which is slightly disappointing. I do consider him to be kind of a more direct threat at goal than some of these other options. Moving into XA, this is kind of a very predictable stat. Bruno is going to be the best. 0.82 is a great amount of assists per game and complements Rashford's XG pretty decently. We can see that Saka is also kind of an assister, 0.31, whereas Martelli is the lowest with 0.05. So it seems like Martelli is kind of filling that role, but not filling that role well. I would consider him to be a more direct threat as mentioned, and that's proven by his lack of assists, but his lack of goal threat is slightly worrying. Then let's move on to actual points, and you guys can see that Saka has the highest amount of actual points, 7.03 per game. We then have Bruno on 5.33, Rashford on 4.1, and Martelli is the lowest with 3.66. Now I generally like to look at expected points per 90 minutes slightly more. This is kind of telling us the amount of points that they should have scored, and yet again you can see that Bruno is heavily underperforming. So Bruno is predicted to score 9.05 over the opening few games. Just imagine if we were looking at Bruno with 9 points per game, that would be absolutely mental. Saka's up next with 7.76. Now this does include penalties, so please just remember that. And then Rashford comes in with 5.31. Now yet again, Martelli is kind of trailing in the stats, 4.11 expected per game, but at least he's only slightly underperforming. So in terms of the stats, I think it's a no-brainer here. You guys can see that Martelli definitely has the worst stats out of these 4, and that's not even considering the penalties for Bruno and Saka. So based on the stats, I do think that Martelli unfortunately is a sell. The expected minutes are going to be less, he's going to be sub more than these other options, and that's never what we like to see. But let's finally go over the fixtures. Now I do think it's a little bit unfair because 2 of these sides have the same fixtures. So let's compare Arsenal to United. Now to the next 6 fixtures, I do consider that the United fixtures are going to be better than the Arsenal ones, even considering that second game against Brighton. We just saw that Brighton's defensive numbers are pretty bad, so you can almost consider that fixture to be a green. Also the fact that kind of Arsenal have some tough games coming up, Man City at the end there with Chelsea, but because they've Everton and Bournemouth, I'm willing to keep Saka in my lineup. So in terms of the fixtures, yet again, it's kind of pushing towards the United side. I do think that their fixtures are better than Arsenal's, so it really seems like the odds are stacked against Martinelli. Now what I will add in terms of Martelli might be kind of a favour in his opinion, is the fact that against these tougher teams, there might be more space in behind, and you guys know that Martelli loves a counter-attack. So just consider that when you are looking at maybe taking him out, is that these games might actually suit his playstyle, and he could come back to bite us. But unfortunately, I do think out of these 4, he's probably the most likely to be on his way out in my team, so let's compare him to a few replacements. Now the replacements you guys already know, it's going to be Raheem Sterling, James Maddison, and finally Phil Foden. So let's see how the stats are comparing according to Martinelli. So on the left hand side, you guys can see in terms of minutes, Raheem Sterling has had the most minutes, but not all of these options have had the maximum. This could be because MADDISON was kind of subbed with a knock earlier in the season, and then Phil Foden missed out in Game Week 3 because of illness. So what I will add is that I think that Raheem Sterling and MADDISON are probably quite nailed in those selections, definitely more nailed than Martinelli is. Then in terms of Phil Foden, yes, he might not be the most nailed option, but I just generally think the attack looks so much better with him in the team, and definitely has been one of the best players for Man City this season. Now the one thing I will also add though, like with Kieran Trippier, is that Phil Foden has that Champions League coming up fairly shortly, whereas Sterling and MADDISON don't. So a big plus in terms of playing time I think for these two options, so definitely they're the more reliable ones. But going over XG, it isn't that kind of set in square. We can see that Foden has the highest XG per game, but just remember he's had less minutes with 0.41. MADDISON and Sterling actually have the exact same XG, which is quite outstanding, as I do consider Sterling to be the more attacking option. Then moving on to the XA, we see that Phil Foden is yet again leading the stats, 0.45 compared to MADDISON's 0.37. Now unfortunately none of these options are on penalties at the current moment. Sterling might be after that Enzo miss, but I can't guarantee that. So in terms of the XG stats or the expected stats, Phil Foden is leading the way. An expectation there, when Phil Foden plays football, he gets you FPL points. Now finally move on to actual points, we can see that Sterling leads the way with just under 8. MADDISON as well is having a pretty decent season, as is Phil Foden. Now you guys can see why we're considering moving on Martinelli compared to these options, almost double in terms of actual points. Now when we do move into actual expected FPL points, it doesn't get any better for Martinelli at the moment. We can see that Sterling is on 6, MADDISON just under 7, and Phil Foden on a lovely 8 rounded. So the stats are definitely favouring the Man City midfielder at the moment. He's just a great FPL asset at the end of the day when he does feature, and I do think that he's a little bit more nailed than he has been in previous seasons. So that's where we are left with a little bit of a tough debate here. If the stats are telling us Phil Foden, he might actually be nailed in his next couple games, why aren't we actually going for him? Well, I think it might be because of those expected minutes. When the Champions League does start, we don't necessarily want an option for the next 2 or 3 game weeks, we want one for at least 6. So let's go over the next 6 fixtures, just give you guys a comparison on who has the better ones, and it's actually a very close debate. Let's start off with those Chelsea fixtures, lovely fixtures coming up, especially in the next 5. Yes, Aston Villa at the 3rd place, but they could concede a few, and Chelsea are attacking pretty well. But Nottingham Forest, Bournemouth, Fulham and Burnley in the next 5 is simply outstanding, and you guys can see why Raheem Sterling is such a popular option. Then let's move on to MADDISON. Yes, Burnley, Sheffield United, 2 great games. Arsenal, Liverpool might not be that great, but after then, Luton and Fulham are outstanding as well. So what I would say, over the next 6, it kind of evens itself out. We have Chelsea facing Arsenal as well as Spurs, and you guys can see that Liverpool defense isn't as good as it's been in previous seasons. Then the final team is Man City, Fulham, West Ham, Nottingham Forest, and then Wolves. Great fixtures on paper. Brighton as well, we've seen that they're going to concede a few XG, and Man City are generally quite fixture proof. So this debate doesn't get any easier in terms of the fixtures, but what I will kind of add in terms of my own interpretation is currently it's between Sterling and MADDISON for me. I just worry about that Foden rotation with the Champions League coming up. We know Pep, he loves to rotate, and therefore I'm going to go for the more assured options. Now between Sterling and MADDISON, it's super hard. I think that Sterling has the better fixtures on paper, MADDISON has the better stats, and he's more of a talisman in that team. He's on set pieces, he might even be on penalties if they do win one. His avenues for points are just outstanding. But then I guess Raheem Sterling has a more kind of direct threat to goal, although the XG of both of these two are actually the same. So my current conclusion is I think that Phil Foden's a great option if you guys want to take a punt. I'm currently between Sterling and MADDISON, but I am leaning slightly towards MADDISON. The stats are slightly better, he has more avenue for points, he might not be as explosive, but I do slightly prefer him. But honestly, this is kind of a 50-50, we could bring out the random wheel generator if you guys want to on the deadline stream. But comment down below, are you guys Team Raheem, Team MADDISON, or actually Team Foden? There might be a small amount of you there that are actually keeping Martinelli, but I think based on the stats, based on the fixtures, it's kind of an easy sell, as long as you guys don't have other fires to put out in your team. So as mentioned, MADDISON's my personal favorite, then it's Raheem Sterling, then finally Foden, but you guys might have a different order. Now the next talking point is going to be kind of a personal one. This is what I was considering in terms of my defender transfer. I want to compare Udogie to Gusto. So these two options, probably the 2 most informed defenders at the moment, but which one of them is actually better? Now it was hard enough comparing kind of the fixtures from MADDISON and Raheem Sterling. I'm going to do it again here, and what I will add is I do actually favour the Spurs fixtures from a defensive point of view. I just feel like Burnley, Sheffield United, Luton and Fulham are slightly better than Nottingham Forest, Bournemouth, Fulham and Burnley. It's just those first 2 games, the Nottingham Forest one and the Bournemouth one, both of those 2 sides have actually been attacking pretty fine, whereas Luton and Sheffield United have been a lot worse. But a very tough debate in terms of fixtures. Both sides have great fixtures on paper. I just prefer the Spurs ones from a defensive point of view. But now let's go over the stats. Udogie's been the more nailed out of the two. 242 minutes compared to 187. But just remember that Reece James did play game week 1. Then in terms of XG, Udogie has the better XG per 90 minutes, 0.12 compared to 0.03, and also the best expected assists. But here's where the big debate comes is in terms of expected clean sheets, the Chelsea defense has been better than the Spurs defense. That's why the expected FPL points are actually pretty similar. So what this debate kind of comes down to is the kind of attacking threat of Udogie versus the clean sheet threat of Gusto. And I think with some easier fixtures coming up, those clean sheets should be more locked in for Spurs. So for me at the current moment, I think this is kind of the general consensus, is Udogie is the better option, but Gusto is a fine replacement if you guys can't afford him. Very kind of quick talking point, but I myself did this comparison, so there might be those of you out there that are also considering it. Now the penultimate talking point is going to be the best fixtures to target in Game Week 4. On the left hand side is going to be the attacking fixtures straight from Fix, and on the right hand side will be the defensive ones. So let's go over the attacking fixtures because they are slightly more interesting. So the best attacking fixture in Game Week 4 is going to be Luton away for West Ham. You guys would have seen this, that Luton defense is pretty terrible. West Ham coming off hot after a win against Brighton on the weekend, so Bowen could even be a Captaincy consideration. Next up we have Chelsea against Nottingham Forest at home, Brentford against Bournemouth at home, Sheffield United and Everton back to back, so this game might have absolute goals in it. Then finally we actually have Burnley against Spurs. I don't really agree with this one, but I think it's just because Spurs aren't the best defense this season, but I consider that Burnley have been a little bit worse. But just remember, this is from Fix, not from me, so don't roast me too much, but you guys can post your own ratings in the comments down below. But now let's go over the defensive fixtures. The number one fixture is Crystal Palace against Wolves. Now fingers crossed here that Johnston actually starts between the sticks, and this won't be Dean Henderson. Because if Johnston does start the game, I think there's a good chance of a clean sheet to be had, as Wolves' attack has been pretty bad. We then have Sheffield United against Everton, so if you guys do own a Bulldog like myself, could he actually be a start over one of my more popular defenders? That's something I'm actually thinking about. Then we have Brentford against Bournemouth, Chelsea against Nottingham Forest, finally we have Spurs against Burnley yet again, and then West Ham against Luton. So if you guys are looking at an Udogie or Gusto, both of them have great defensive fixtures this week. Fix is saying that Chelsea have the edge though. Otherwise, as mentioned, if Bulldog is going to be playable against Everton at home, he could be a selection, but Everton have actually had quite a bit of XG. But these ratings once again are from Fix, so you guys can target them if you want to do that. Now the last talking point of our ultimate guides as usual is going to be all about captaincy, and as always there's one option that's above the rest, and that's probably Erling Haaland. Now here's Fulham at home, the team that I think is the worst defense in the Prem at the moment, so if Erling Haaland doesn't score in this one, there must be something wrong. Now I don't even think that there's going to be a rotation as Man City don't have a game this midweek, so Erling Haaland should be fit and firing to go against this Fulham team. But if you guys do want to go differential, I'm not going to go over Raheem Sterling because I went over him last week. He's a great option yet again, great fixture on the cards, but I decided to go for two alternatives. The first alternative is me and Mbeumo against Bournemouth at home, great fixture on paper, and Mbeumo should get back on the scoring way of things, and there's been a lot of success for the right wingers against Bournemouth this season. So I like him as an option, very still differential at the moment, so if you guys don't have him, look at bringing him in. The next option has the best fixture in terms of the attacking ratings from Fix. It's me Bowen against Luton away. Now unfortunately Luton haven't kind of started off this Prem that well, and after just beating Brighton and Bowen having an absolute masterclass, I do actually think he's going to continue on the way of things. So very unfortunate that I can't really get him into my team, as I think in terms of kind of a free hit squad, the best fixture on the cards, and I think that Bowen could do really well. But I'm going to say this once, and I think if you're going to go without Erling Haaland as your captain, that's simply outrageous. Everything's pointing towards him, even the projected points. So let's bring up those projected points, and Fix is saying that Haaland will score 7.6 compared to Mbeumo at 5.7 and Bowen at 5.3. So still a pretty decent showing from Mbeumo and Bowen, but they're going to be differential enough just owning them. Whereas if Erling Haaland bangs and your captain doesn't, you're going to be crying till Game Week 5. So comment down below, I think all of you are going to be captaining Erling Haaland, but if there is anyone, please explain the reasoning behind it. Did you lose a bet? Are you kind of taking a chance? I guess there always is a chance in FPL that your captain outperforms him. But if there were any other talking points, comment them down below. As always, I reply to every single comment. So comment your transfer dilemmas or your real life advice. I'll answer anything. But this is basically going to wrap up the video, guys. Hope you guys did enjoy it. Please don't forget to like if you did and subscribe if you haven't subscribed yet. Team selection coming up in the next few days, so just watch out for that one. But I'm signing off. It's been Dayvy FPL and I'm out. Cheers, bye.